So I think we can start. It's 3:30. I'm sure people will continue to flow in within the next couple minutes. I would like to warmly welcome Tracy, Alice, and Caleb for another great session that builds the bridge between the profit and non-profit worlds and to make the world a better place to live, more inclusive, and where we feel that we all belong to. With that, Tracy, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Anna, and hi, everybody. Please do drop in the chat where you're checking in from and joining from. We'd love to see that. And feel free to adjust your view either to gallery view to see everyone or to speaker view so you can highlight whoever is speaking at the time. So I'm Tracy Baird. I'm in the Game Changer cohort. And I'm going to sort of kick us off and want to give a brief overview of what our session is going to be today. And then I'll invite my co-panelists, Alice and Caleb, to introduce themselves. So as I said, I'm a game changer and lead. I also did my undergrad at Stanford, so I'm familiar with the campus and university, did my graduate work at UNC Chapel Hill. And everyone who's known me since I was little and I was trying to edit nursery rhymes to have greater representation of girls in those nursery rhymes understands the work that I do with such passion in women's health, reproductive health, sexual health and rights, and gender equality. So happy International Women's Day to everyone. Also acknowledging that these are hard days right now as we watch what's unfolding in Ukraine, with 2 million new refugees joining the 82 million people already displaced from their homes around the world. And I know our lead cohorts and colleagues are from all over the world, and that these are complicated times, and times when corporations and nonprofits really need to step up our game. So we're going to talk today about how corporations and nonprofits can work together to make the world a better, more inclusive and more diverse place. And we really hope that people will join in the conversation, share your experiences, your questions, your ideas, what you've seen and done. We'll have some specific time for that, but please do jump in either through the chat or with hands and videos and microphones. And we hope you'll take 3 main things away from the session today. First, if you're in the corporate world, we hope you'll gain an increased understanding of the benefits and opportunities of collaborating with nonprofits. Second, we'll discuss the benefits of serving on nonprofit boards, and we'll actually provide some guidance on how to do that. And later we'll share a tip sheet if that's something of interest. And we will talk about different ways that together, whatever sector you're from, we can advance and enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion. So my role is as a nonprofit CEO. I lead an organization called Engender Health. We've been working for decades in more than 100 countries to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights. We work with governments, ministries of health, medical and midwifery associations, communities, advocates, media, journalists, police, and more. And we do this work governed by a board that includes people from all different sectors. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I want to introduce my colleague and friend, Alice Korngold. Let her introduce herself, then she'll pass to Caleb, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. It's delighted to be here today. Was really happy when Tracy was in touch about doing this. For 30 years. I've worked at the intersection of businesses and nonprofits and written and published a couple of books. One, Leveraging Goodwill, Strengthening Nonprofits by Engaging Businesses, and the other, A Better World, Inc., How Companies Profit by Solving Global Problems Where Governments Cannot. So this topic, and by the way, DEI is the thread throughout 30 years of my work and research and writing. Excited to be with you here today. Thank you. Caleb? Oh, we can't hear you.
Classic. Excited to be here, and thank you guys for having us speak. And I was really excited when Tracy mentioned this opportunity, and I'm working with Alice as well. And I am a consultant by background, but I've recently joined the board a little over a year ago, board of directors for a community sailing nonprofit in New York City. And so had a really interesting experience with that. And as since then had a lot of other kind of like intersections with my corporate experience, professional experience, as well as personal experience, and also the value that I've been able to get to the board and expand my network. So I'm really excited to speak with you guys more about that and share what I've experienced.
Great. So as we get started, and I know other people may be still logging in, but we wanted to share just a quick poll to get a sense of who is in our virtual room. So Jeff, who's here from LEAD, helping us with so many things, if you can put up the first poll question. So we're interested in what sector you work in, and if it's multiple, choose the one that best fits what you think you're doing today or these days. And we'll show the results in just a sec when everyone's had a chance to click. Jeff, we'll take our cue from you when it's time to show the answers. Okay, so about 2/3 in the for-profit sector and almost 30% nonprofit. I'm excited about that, and I look forward to hearing from you. Sometimes I feel a little lost in courses like financial innovation when we're talking about net present value and shareholders and stocks, and I am sitting there shaking my head. I don't work in the billions in the nonprofit sector, only thousands and millions. So love to hear from other nonprofit folks. Great, thanks. And Jeff, let's see if we can the second poll question. I'm not seeing a way to answer this one. Oh,
Sorry about that.
there we go.
There we go.
Perfect. So we're interested in whether you've had board experience, done any board service. And for folks just joining, we just had a poll question up. If you missed it, that's okay. We'll have the answer in a minute. And you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from.
That's just about everyone. Here's results.
Great. Yeah, so half the group not yet experienced on a board, but interested. I think interested is sort of our sweet spot, but love to learn from those of you who have served on nonprofit boards, right? Thank you, that's great. I think Alice, you're gonna start us off with some background and data and start making the connection to DEI. And as people join, please do pop into the chat and let us know where you are.
Terrific, thank you. So with the topic of connecting for-profits and nonprofits to advance DEI, there are two areas I'll mention, and I'll zero in on one in particular, but can always address questions during our discussion. One is the value of corporate nonprofit partnerships. Corporate NGO, as you know, is a more global term. Nonprofit is a US term, but partnerships between companies and nonprofits. And we've done dozens of case studies that show the value, the benefit to businesses, to nonprofits and communities, because together they're better equipped to address social, economic, environmental challenges, with companies bringing funding, technology, human capital to the table, and on the nonprofit side of the equation, bringing expertise, credibility, and access and relationships with marginalized and remote communities. So that's on the corporate nonprofit partnerships. The area I'm going to dig into a little bit more deeply is the opportunity and value for business people to serve on nonprofit boards of directors on global, national, and regional boards, which has been a centerpiece of our work for 30 years, in addition to board consulting. And for the past several years, we've done an annual study funded by multinational corporations to explore, we've known anecdotally the benefits, but we wanted to really look at some data from surveys, from focus groups, from interviews. And based on thousands of surveys and interviews, what we learned is that for business people who serve on nonprofit boards, they develop personally and professionally. But one of the real takeaway each year that we've done this study is their value of nonprofit board service in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because business people serving on nonprofit boards would say, well, I serve on boards with people from very different backgrounds than my own. And we also asked, how does that potentially change your perspective? And do you bring that back to work? And in fact, they said it makes them appreciate the perspectives of people from different backgrounds than their own. And back at work, they form more inclusive committees and teams and hire and promote more inclusively. And to that point, we've seen it anecdotally and again in the study that when business people go on nonprofit boards, you're used to dealing with billions of dollars. And on a nonprofit board, it could be $5 to $15 to $20 million. So the assumption is often, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. And within 6 to 12 months, most business people serving on nonprofit boards are really humbled to learn how complex the revenue models are for nonprofits, as well as reporting and timeframes. And that is part of their learning and growing and gaining respect for perspectives of people who haven't had the business training that they have. So it's really an exciting growth opportunity. And we love to see how people really grow and develop and engage. For companies, nonprofit board service is a great way to develop leaders, to engage deeply and productively in the community, and again, to advance DEI. So advance DEI in two ways. One is with people gaining appreciation for perspectives of people from different backgrounds than their own. But number two, what we found is when we studied people at companies who were not on boards, nonprofit boards, but were interested, it was predominantly people from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. So here is the opportunity for companies to develop and engage people from diverse backgrounds on boards. So another DEI opportunity. And then for nonprofit boards, of course, people from business bringing tremendous experience and expertise and often resources. There's something else, let me just keep an eye on the time, that we have, I mentioned that we've been looking at DEI, consulting to nonprofits on nonprofit boards on DEI for 30 years. And our recent work in terms of seminars and consulting and research and analysis has led us to three conclusions: that racial equity and justice are fundamental to every single nonprofit mission, every single sustainable development goal, housing, economic development, education, healthcare. In every one of these areas, the resources for white communities are 3 to 4 times higher. There's a study by SDSN that documents this than for communities of color. So the discrepancy is significant. So we know that racial equity and justice are challenges for every nonprofit in maximizing their potential. That's number one. Number two, we know that 78% of people who serve on nonprofit boards are white. So you don't have people, a sufficient number of people at the table with direct experience. And as Isabel Wilkerson says, she wrote Caste and some other tremendous books, empathy is no substitute for lived experience. And so our second conclusion is that only diverse, equitable, and inclusive boards can truly advance a nonprofit to achieve its greatest potential. And so the third conclusion is that it is imperative to transform nonprofit boards to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive within the next 3 years, not as a long-term goal, but as an immediate goal. I think I'll stop at that. We have had numerous discussions. Tracy and Caleb were part of a group of 45 people where we talked about how to advance DEI on nonprofit boards with a heavy focus on equity and inclusion as well. And if that comes up in the questions, we can talk about that too. Thank you for having me. And I think, is Caleb speaking next?
Yeah. Well,
yes, wonderful.
I have a lot to say on the topic, but I think one to engage the you all briefly. So I'm gonna drop a question in the chat. I know we had some folks who are participating on boards or interested in it. So for those of you who have, or maybe those who have kind of seen something, what have you seen or experienced about the importance of DEI on boards or other groups you belong to? And this is a really kind of a broad question, but we really want to make this discussion get a lot of engagement if we can. So for those of you guys who have worked on boards before or other groups that you belong to, what have you seen or experienced by the importance of DEI?
I can maybe jump here because, well, this topic is very close to my heart. I am very involved into the DE&I actions in my company, and this is Weber Grill. And yes, and I am also a co-chair for the learning and development for the women of Weber. But what I notice is that Weber, my organization, I don't have the board experience, but my organization is very, very serious about the inclusion. And I will say inclusion, not diversity, because diversity for me is just the first step. It's like making the proper ratio, but it does not mean that people are really, included, right? And where, as you said, this equity and justice, right, that is in the workplace. And what is also created, there are different groups. We have, in our small really company, corporate, we have Women of Weber, we have African American group, we have people with the Spanish descent, and also the LGBT group. So big diversity, everyone feel included, respected, and a lot of things going on.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think that's really important with companies and of all sizes to form interest groups, because it helps people talk about issues and then surface issues potentially that they're experiencing in the company. So it does, I think, really help advocacy, and it's cool to hear that you guys have those groups.
I think the one thing that I still miss, and I don't see it in the diversity or inclusion, is we talk about women, we talk about people of color, we talk about people of different sexual orientation, but we do not talk enough, I think, about neurodiversity.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but Microsoft has a program for people on the spectrum with autism, and they are brilliant in technology and computers. And it's a very robust program. There's a chief diversity officer, chief neurodiversity officer who runs the program. And the employees who work through that program, they love the camaraderie also. So it's really another example of a win-win.
I'm seeing that Tim put in the chat, and Tim, feel free to grab the mic. It looks like since you, Tim, joined an organization as CEO, you were tasked to diversify your healthcare organization. Do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about that experience?
Hi, everyone. Sure. I work for a small regional hospice up here in the Placerville, California area. So we're near Sacramento, between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe. And El Dorado County is very conservative and white. That's just a fact of the demographics. And we also serve Sacramento, though, that's one of the most diverse communities in the country. So how do we do both well? We have been doing well up here in El Dorado County, where we started 43 years ago. but Sacramento is a newer service area for us. So, you know, in addition to diversifying our board, we're working to diversify the staff so we can as best reflect the communities we serve as possible. And just today, I was on a call with my leadership team, really encouraging them to help me develop some public education resources because, you know, in hospice, we care for people who are terminally ill and they will die within 6 months, according to the CMS definition and requirement for care. So there are certainly underserved communities throughout the country and certainly in our service area. And a lot of it, from my perspective, is having conversations and meeting people and talking with them and explaining what's going on and just kind of wiping away any barriers that might exist. So that's really the strategy and the approach. And we do have a long ways to go. But the other thing that I will mention is I hired 3 subject matter experts. And there's one very unique group called Holistic Underground who we've engaged to continue with our work with visioning statements, with helping the organization learn how to be a more inclusive and diverse, really from the bottom up, I should say. So those are some of the things we're doing to expand, you know, the successful base that we've had so we can serve others more effectively.
That it's really impressive. And I would also underscore what Anna said in terms of equity and inclusion. So it means involving people from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds in leadership positions, ensuring that everyone participates in a discussion and everyone's point of view is respected. So those are important. And in terms of diversity, and to both your points, to Anna and to you, Tim, we often match people from the employee resource groups to nonprofit boards. So Tim, those are opportunities for you, and Anna, those are opportunities for members of the groups to engage people from diverse backgrounds on nonprofit boards.
You know, we're recruiting right now, Alice. So it sounds like, how would I access that list?
The list of?
That you just referred to, if I understood you correctly.
The employee, so every company or every large company has employee resource groups. So usually for Black employees, for Latinx employees, for LGBT, so women, you know, a number of different groups. Anna, you would know more about this. And those are people who've often stepped forward to play a leadership role. So ideal for a company and a nonprofit board to engage with.
Great, good to know, thank you.
Yeah, Tim, I just want to make another quick comment. I empathize and respect that you guys are seeking out diverse talent for the board and also for other parts of the organization. It is more difficult. I think that one thing that I found in my experience, and probably backs up with research as well, is that the traditional pipelines that exist for folks to kind of be surfaced and to get opportunities like this skew in the same direction demographically as what you'd expect in the more mainstream. And so it is a little bit harder to find those folks, but I really celebrate you for finding, you know, a Black executive to come on, take on and be part of the group, and an Asian nurse as well. And it's hard work, but it's a fulfilling work, and it kind of make creating your own pipelines, if you will, and other sources to really find and place these folks. And
yeah, they've been great additions.
Caleb, do you want to share about your experience on Hudson River community sailing?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick background on me. I'm a Howard University alum. I've been sailing for most of my life. My dad taught me, and when I was in DC at school, I was part of a community sailing organization. I really got involved just so I could go and use their boats, because how community sailing works is they got a fleet of boats. You usually pay a membership for the summer, and you can go and take lessons and that kind of thing. And if you're an instructor, you get to use boats for free. So I got involved in that. Didn't really know what community sailing was, and over time really got much more involved. Ended up working at 2 other community sailing organizations to volunteer or as a teacher, or and most recently as a board member in Hudson River Community Sailing. And so I'm passionate about sailing and also passionate about diversity within the sport, and generally bringing folks who maybe didn't think they had access to certain things to give them access and show them what's possible. And so I didn't think that I would have the opportunity to join the board, and I actually formed a really good relationship with the executive director, and they had a need, and they're actually going through a program to diversify their board and some of their staff as well. And so it actually worked out really well. As a consultant, it was easy for me to jump in and see some areas where I could help out, and also be able to provide governance, advice and not necessarily jumping in like I've done as a consultant, but as a board member, it's more around the idea of providing guidance and governance and accountability in that sense. And so it was interesting to learn that dynamic and also to learn like how a nonprofit's run from the vantage point of a board and having also seen it, having taught and volunteered and participated in their program. So I think through that process, I joined the board development governance committee, and so we were accountable for a lot of things that have to do with the people on the board, but also with recruiting. And so we were able to bring on this past year since I've joined. We brought on 2 women of color and another person of color and then another woman actually who joined and was going to lead one of our committees. And these are all folks who are already in our base, so there were already people who were engaged and with the organization. So we were able to give them an opportunity to deepen their role with the organization. I think that's one key aspect that I saw is that when you have a particular position or cause that you're passionate about, you can support financially, you can support with your time, you can also support your time as a board member and as a leader. And I thought that was a really cool opportunity for me to kind of get involved from using my consultant hat, which I love to solve problems in that context, and also be able to contribute to the organization and at the same time. So it's really been beneficial. And then as I've done that and spoken with other people and been outspoken about my role and the success we have with the organization, people reach out to me, young people in color fashion, how did you do this? Like, what is that like? What's the experience like? And so that's been really helpful too, and really encouraging for me is that, it seemed unlikely for me at first. And so now that I've been in over a year, it's really exciting. And I want to show other people, how they can also have this opportunity and, what give them expectations of what it might be like on a board and what they expect it to do. So. And I'm here to answer questions if you have. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Caleb, you really exemplify bringing your passion and your skills together through board service. And the passion you have for sailing and for creating a broader opportunity for sailing among communities that didn't necessarily have access. And bringing your management skills, even in a governance role, to the board. That's the kind of intersection that I think makes such a big difference. I want to notice Christelle's question, and Christelle, see if you want to add to what I'm seeing there and respond to that a little bit, and then segue and explain a little bit more about my board, because I think it'll also address, Christelle, your point. But I see here, Christelle, you're asking about, is it possible to join and be part of a board without feeling like you have to represent your entire race or gender or country of origin or anything else? Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for acknowledging my question. Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm definitely interested in joining boards. I do believe that bringing more diversity of perspectives is definitely going to help companies just better cater to the needs of a global population, as we are all interconnected. Yes. However, I know that I'm going to share my screen, as a Black woman, I really want, coming from Europe, being French, coming from parents who were born and raised in Africa, in Congo, DRC. So I do have multiple cultures. I do speak multiple languages. I really would like to make sure that while joining a board, I will have the ability to bring my global perspectives outside of just representing a race of individuals that I cannot represent, because just by living in the US, I am in San Jose, California right now. I was not born in the US. I moved to the US when in my mid-20s. So I don't have necessarily the same exact experiences as any African-Americans born in the US. I do sympathize, and I can empathize, because without opening my mouth, I'm still a Black individual. So I just would like to better understand what could that experience would look like, and whether there could be opportunities to think about diversity leaders joining boards for profits and nonprofits outside of their skin colors, because I think we are a little bit more complex, and there are multiple levels through who we are, and we cannot be put in boxes.
So Crystal, there's so many ways I want to
Great
go
questions.
with this, and I'm sure others will want to jump in. I'll start by just acknowledging I grew up in Southern California, and I never understood when I traveled places why people assumed I could surf, right? Just because I grew up in Southern California, like, don't put me in that box, right? I'm not, I'm neither tall nor blonde nor a surfer. I don't fit that box. I think people, they can pick one thing and then the expectations follow. A couple of things that I want to share, and then others may jump in. To me, the point is to have a diverse group where people feel like they can bring their full selves and everything they personally represent to the conversation, to the work, that inclusiveness. I think we are in danger if any one person is meant to represent entire populations and groups. No one woman can represent women. No one Latinx man can represent Latinx men. No one trans woman can represent trans women, never mind adding in country of origin and everything else. I think we can also see that diversity crisscrosses in so many different ways. My undergraduate college roommate is of Indian ancestry, born in Brazil, grew up in New York, and she and I now, many years after we finished college, do very similar work, have very similar experiences and very similar thought patterns with our education together. So we have that, there's the pieces in common and then the pieces that are very different. So I'd say as a nonprofit executive working to build my board, one thing is we never want anyone to be the sole representative of any group. So having one Black woman on a board is not a diverse board, right? Or one young person on a board, one 25-year-old board member can't represent the demographic and the generation of board members. But then also the point is not for the people to be, as an individual, we're not diverse. It's the group that's diverse together. The individual brings themselves and their full experience. So I think if you are in a group where people expect that you can speak for and represent a whole category of people based on your characteristics, I'd call it out, be concerned. But I think that you bring all of that to the group and combine it with everybody else. The point, in my view, in leading a diverse staff and a diverse board is to have people with enough different experiences, backgrounds, ways of thinking, perspectives, that together we make better decisions. Together we're more empathetic. Together we're more mission oriented. And it's the combination of those things. But I'd love your question. There's a lot of passion in the question, and probably hear my passion in my answer. Alice and Caleb want to jump in on Christelle's really good point?
Christelle, it's a really important insight and question, and something we hear about and see a lot. And I would say that if you're considering a nonprofit board, that's a really important conversation to have with the CEO, with the board chair, with the governance chair, to have some common understanding about what you bring to the table, the role you can play, and what you don't bring to the table and the role you can't play. And Caleb, I'd be interested too, and I know that on the board where you're serving, you're heading up a diversity initiative. And it's critical for boards to think of this very broadly, not let's have one person of color and they'll speak for a whole race, So would you like to speak to that?
Yeah,
Caleb?
absolutely. And Christelle, your point that hit home for me, I definitely felt that and been in a position before. And I think it's definitely a stigma and a hot topic among folks of color who are advancing. And then you get into a room where you're the only person that looks like you or has your background. You're expected to be the ambassador for everybody else in the world looks like you. And it's like, it's completely unrealistic, but it's a natural thing for people to do for whatever reason. So I think that, Alice said, setting that expectation up front, it's like, I'm not the ambassador of everybody who's come from Africa or whatever cross section of my experience are, but my benefit that I bring is that I have very similar or very similar relative or comparative experiences, but from a different perspective. And that different perspective is going to be valuable in decision making and creativity around how we solve problems, and also what we decide to pursue. And so that's kind of to speak to your point, like I said, I love that you brought that up, and it's a really good point. My experience as far as advancing diversity within the board, we're actually doing a fellowship through the Lawrence Hall, Berkeley Hall of Science called Working Towards Racial Equity. And that's something that we submitted application for to get the grant. It's a National Science Foundation grant that's supporting this program, but they're basically looking at outdoor education organizations and really identifying and running a curriculum with us. And it's a lot of engagement actually I'm on the board, and so I'm not really supposed to, but be involved in the day-to-day, but the staff is actually participating in this, and they asked for a board liaison. So I volunteer my time to do that. And the process has been extremely enlightening. I'm just learning about racial equity and some of the white supremacy and other things that happen. And some of the topics are really helpful to understand. And also it's really a good opportunity for me to work with the staff, obviously, maybe not obviously, but from a government perspective, I'm not supposed to tell the staff what to do, and I don't have any desire to. The executive director is like amazing, but getting to work with them and hear their perspectives, having worked before as a volunteer has really been fascinating. And also that's really informed not just the work I'm doing with the board, but also the work I'm doing with the company, my full-time corporate job. So it's been really beneficial. And I really commend our executive director for pursuing opportunities like this to really look forward and see how we can incorporate equity and diversity at every level of organization, not just having a ratio percentage represented, but how we can change the way that we think as an organization, how we make decisions.
Yeah, I'd like to share a little bit about my board. So as I mentioned, I work for Engender Health. I'm the president and CEO, and for decades we've been working on global sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender equality, and we really work hard to walk our talk. So we're talking about equality and inclusion in our work. We program for that. We do trainings. We train others. So we train ourselves, and we do the work internally. And that work that we do we call it JEDI, makes us feel like Star Wars. It's gender, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our JEDI work includes things as simple as publishing our pay gap analysis, which is not required of nonprofits in the US. It is required of nonprofits in the UK. But we do ours and publish it to hold ourselves accountable. And again, it's International Women's Day. We need to hold ourselves accountable. We also are, putting in many systems and policies and trainings and things in place to address a white supremacy culture, address the history of colonization and global health, some big topics. And, it can be as simple as starting with pronouns in a job description. We've eliminated pronouns in a job description because the he, she binary doesn't help us recruit a fully diverse candidate pool. So we are doing that internally. And part of our thinking about diversity is, as you might imagine, with our board of directors. Since we work globally, it's important for us to have an international board. So I'm not looking across the United States to build a diverse board. I'm looking across the world to build a diverse board. But our diversity comes in a number of different sort of continua, right? So there's gender, there's race, ethnicity, there's geography and country of origin. We also have people from the corporate sector. We have academics, we have healthcare providers and folks in the medical space. I have a former member of parliament of the UK. I have a venture capitalist, right? So the mix of experiences that people have, you can imagine a crosstab with race and country of origin. So I have an accountant on our board whose mother gave birth to her at home alone in a small house in India. Now she's an accountant here in Virginia in the United States, but her origin story is very much related to the work that we do to help make sure women have good maternal health care and that there's safe delivery of babies all around the world. So we have this mix, and we're always looking for people who fill new parts of what we're doing, who come from different perspectives, an academic nursing perspective. He also happens to be Kenyan, a development and fundraising perspective. She happens to be Nigerian. And we put the pieces together. It's a mosaic, right? And each person has so many characteristics that we are really looking to build quite a complex system of members. Our board put a new diversity, equity, and inclusion policy in place just about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. I'm very proud they did. They were, they had trouble articulating it, to be frank, but they did a nice job of being able to say what they valued in diversity in the board. And it really is around representing the world in which we work and the ways we want to think about the work that we do. Our biggest gap in our board is age. We do not have young board members. We've talked about advisory boards and bringing on younger board members. I think age is one of the areas when you're building a diverse board, it's very easy to tokenize young people and say, okay, you're the youth member. And really, that's not acceptable to behave that way. So until we can do it well, we haven't done it much. So our youngest board members are in their early 40s. Right now, our board, made a note a moment ago, our board is a little over half women, people identify as women, and about 40% non-white, people of color, and about a third to almost a half born outside of the US. And we have some Americans living overseas and some internationally born and raised folks living in the US, so everyone's kind of mixed up. But one of the other things that is important to me is that the board in a lot of ways also mirrors and reflects our leadership team. So if we had a really diverse board and an all-white American leadership team, we would still have big problems, right? And while we aren't looking for a one-to-one match, we are looking for diversity at all levels of the organization. So our leadership team is global and diverse. Our staff, including in the US, is diverse, more diverse than our staff elsewhere. In Tanzania, our entire staff is Tanzanian. In the US, we're about half American and half from the rest of the world. But one of the things I have to say that it all comes down to is finding people who care passionately about what we do. They want to make the world a more gender equal place. They want people to have access to their full sexual and reproductive health and rights. And they come at it with accounting chops, with investment experience, with fundraising experience, with medical experience, with media experience. So I think, to me, one of the things that I'm always encouraging people is, you have so many skills, and if you can bring those skills in some form, in a governance form, as Caleb was saying, it's different from doing the work, but it's leading and providing that support to the leadership of the organization. And then if you have the passion, I think it's really possible and really exciting to make that kind of a match. So I'm going to pause there. And Caleb, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment real quick. Something I just realized. I think that we're also, for those of you guys who are working on nonprofit boards or for-profit boards, there's assumption, I think, here that your leadership, executive director, the CEO is actually interested in diversity on the board. And so some of you may be in a position where you are the person of diverse background on your board and you're trying to affect change in that organization. And so that can be sometimes difficult. It's certainly a lot easier if you have an executive director who's interested in that. That's how really helped me get in position in the board. But I just want to share a quick fact that I actually pulled from Alice's book. But it's McKinsey studied in 2015. They studied 1,000 companies covering 12 countries, and they found that gender diversity is correlated with both profitability and value creation. And additionally, top team ethnic and cultural diversity is correlated with profitability. And then furthermore, the penalty for not being diverse on both measures persists. So if there is an opportunity for, if you are in a position that I kind of mentioned before, where you are trying to advance diversity or bring that as a priority for the organization that you have, there's a good amount of research from McKinsey and some other research places that have actually published that shows that it's not just the right thing to do, it's also good for business. And I think that's a really important thing to bring to bear if you have an opportunity.
And that's on the for-profit side. And on the nonprofit side, as I said earlier, there's no way a nonprofit is going to get anywhere near maximizing its potential unless it understands the racial justice and racial equity to the extent that they're factors in advancing the mission, which means you've got to have a very diverse board to really understand and dig into that. I want to mention another book, and we are sharing resources at the end of this. So, a friend of mine, Fumia Rewa, last name Arewa, A-R-E-W-A, just published a book called Disrupting Africa, Technology, Law, and Development. And first of all, she's just an extraordinary person. And everything she writes, she's writing books on music now, are incredible. But what she points out is that countries in Africa, many countries are at a crossroads of tremendous opportunity, but what is interfering with progress is what she calls colonial overhang, is laws and infrastructure that were developed in colonial and neo-colonial times that really interfere with the objectives and the goals and the interests of countries and people who live in the countries in Africa. So it's an amazing book, and she also does interviews. So it's Professor Olufunmilayo Arewa, A-R-E-W-A. If you can hear her or see her book, I highly recommend it.
Right, and we just put a couple links in the chat. Christelle, I see your comment that I think I might have mentioned my board member Ruby happened to have been born in a certain way or in a certain place. And I mean, isn't that it? Like, it's not like I wasn't looking for somebody who, you know, barely survived her birth, because we're an organization that works on safe motherhood. It's about bringing people together with a whole range and array of experiences. And it's remarkable if we give people space to tell us their stories and to contribute their whole selves and their passions and the why behind the work that they want to do. I was talking to a colleague, he's one of our country representatives, and I was asking him, it was the first time we'd had a one-on-one conversation, and I asked him how he got interested in reproductive health, right? I mean, you can do lots of different kinds of medicine and you can do so many things. There's like the whole world. How is it that you are a specialist in HIV and family planning? And he explained that it took him 9 years to get through medical school, university and medical school, instead of the usual 6 of university and medical school in his country, because of course the country was at war and they had to keep stopping medical school. And they were at war. He's in Democratic Republic of Congo now, is Kinshasa. And you know, he brings a different experience than another colleague of ours from DR Congo, who spent half of his life in Belgium, half of it in Boston, a little bit in Gilroy, California, has moved back to Congo. He feels very Congolese. He's born in Kinshasa, works in Kinshasa, very different experience from someone whose medical school training was interrupted by the war multiple times and had to provide healthcare during that time as a medical student because there was no one else to do so. So we can draw out each other's experiences, and they don't have to be dramatic, right? I mean, I have lived a pretty non-dramatic life, but I still have a lot to share about being a sister and being a daughter and being a mother and being a student and being a friend, and the experiences that I have had. And I think that also adds to diversity. You can't see it in a tick box of gender, race, ethnicity, but I do think that's part of when we say we want a diverse group or diverse board, it's the full experiences people have. And then back to a point that Anna stated so clearly, it's not just having those characteristics or those experiences, but really feeling like you can bring your full self and be included and have a voice.
Tracy, I wanted to actually put a question that Sunil asked. Thank you for that question, Sunil. Wonderful to hear about your insights. One question about inclusion of people with disabilities. Do you see momentum on that front as well? And I actually want to share an interesting anecdote that's related to this. So when I was teaching, volunteer teaching in Treasure Island Sailing Center in the San Francisco Bay Area, did a course on, they taught us how to do it and then gave us a course to teach folks who were, excuse me, visually impaired how to sail, which if you think about sailing and what it involves, certainly I did. I was like, well, I don't know how that's even going to be possible. And so there's actually this competitive sport around visually impaired sailing and other sailing with disabilities. And it's actually a pretty big community and pretty active community. And I got exposed to that community and was just blown away. So as a teacher of sailing for a long time, when I took these folks out and taught them how to hold a tack, which is basically hold the same position, you know, relative to land, they had the folks who were visually impaired they were the best at like immediately understanding how to keep the boat going in a straight direction using the sail and the wind and the water than I'd ever experienced of any demographic. And the reason is because they weren't relying on visual markers on land to actually see to line the boat up, which is a delayed response. So you kind of see what you're trying to go towards and you make a correction one way or other on the tiller to get it. Because they weren't relying on it, they were feeling the wind on the sails, the sun on their face, and the feeling of the tiller and the pressure of that, and just like a straight arrow line. And it blew my mind. And I got really interested in other aspects of like sailing, disabled sailing or impaired sailing, and what we call actually adaptive sailing. And so when I met with the executive director that in this for the board that I'm currently on, I mentioned that I had that experience and how excited I was about, you know, potentially bringing that to Hudson River community sailing. That was something that was on his board for the year. And so it was like an immediate connection. And since then, we've been able to actually race with another board member who doesn't have use of his legs, and he was our skipper. And we created a rig on the boat in this big fundraiser regatta we do once a year. And so that was a huge, just really cool experience for me to have a friend and fellow board member who's actually younger than me and a person of color racing in that position, and for us to be able to compete that way and also be able to bring forward a program that supports folks with disabilities, whether spinal cord injuries or visual or auditory, preventative capabilities, to be a part of our adaptive program. So it's something that I see is really important, and something I think that's like absolutely 100% part of the whole inclusive and diverse, perspective that you can try to bring to this organization. I know it was a little bit long, but I got really excited with the questions. Thank you, Sunil.
And I'd like to address it too. I think it's a great question, Sunil. And I think it's critical that all boards have people from a variety of backgrounds, including people with disabilities. And a recent situation, and it paralleled some others. So a relative of mine is chairman of a board of an organization in New York that serves people with disabilities. And he knows my work, and he got in touch and he said, we need additional board members. We need some people with business and finance skills, but our bylaws mandate that half of our board be people with disabilities. So I actually got in touch with the chief disability officer at a multinational corporation whom I met on a panel, and she actually, the company's in Seattle. She said, I've got some people in New York, let me get in touch, identified someone, she's been elected. And so that's really exciting. And what is exciting to me about that model of board composition, there's a refugee organization we work with, and they are transitioning to 50% of the board being refugees, not families of refugees, which they've had before, but people who've been refugees themselves. And another story is a friend of mine who built a nonprofit for economic development for communities of color. And she just started the organization a few years ago, built a board, and all 14 people are Black except for one person. And to me, it's like flip the model, flip the scenario. Why are we thinking in terms of, oh, let's find one person or two or three? Let's really think about the community we serve and the people who will bring the most value and contribute most meaningful to the conversation about the direction we're going in and how we address our greatest challenges, which in many cases are racial equity and racial justice. So I encourage you to think about that, a whole flipping the scenario.
Very good. Thank you very much for your comments. If you have any reference material, I would absolutely love to receive that as well. Because I am trying to, I'm participating in a committee at my work, and I'm trying to help them in defining policies and awareness, so that, because there is a lot of unconscious, I wouldn't say bias as such, but there is just lack of awareness that happens.
Exactly. So. If anyone who wants to get in touch, you can reach me at alice@korngoldconsulting.com. I think it's in the reference,
yeah, it's in our tip sheet.
Yeah.
I'll post that again just so people have it. And I'm also, you can always find me through Workplace, through LEAD.
Yep.
I think the point you make too, Sunil, is important when we think about making space for people, we need to make systems work for them. So I was just talking about this because we have in our in Gender Health office in India, we're convening a youth advisory board. And, you know, it's very easy for the adults to schedule a meeting when it's convenient for the adults, which may be during work hours or early evening, but not necessarily convenient for a youth advisory board when they have a school schedule and they have homework and they have other responsibilities with their family. And similarly, when we're working with either as staff or board or volunteers, people with disabilities, we need to make sure that the systems will work for them. We know that people will contribute brilliantly if they can be included, but if transportation to board meetings is a problem, if the meeting space is not accessible, if there's not language interpretation or people aren't speaking the same language, or there's ways to engage people with visual impairments or hearing impairments, then they're excluded before you even get them into the boardroom. And so one of the things that we've been doing with one of our programs, actually in Tanzania, is working with some disability health and rights advocates who are helping us completely rethink what it means to engage with professionals with disabilities so that we can better serve community populations with disabilities. And part of that has been, you know, like, okay, we were really clear we needed a ramp to the office. We were not so clear that we needed to make sure that the office spaces had better audio privacy, because for people who are hard of hearing, being in a setting like, I don't know if you can hear the helicopter outside my window right now, but if you have a lot of distracting noises, it was very hard with people with hearing impairments to participate. So of course, disability is so varied, right?
Yeah,
People are so varied, but to make sure that the openness to access is there, right? Don't build a ramp for someone with a hearing impairment, but make sure that what you're doing is that openness to design for the people you bring on. Yeah. I see someone's Tim, you're about to leave for a board meeting, or if you may have left. So well done, a very topical reason to leave. Love to hear if there are other questions or comments or examples you all have seen where a group that's more diverse can outperform a group that's less diverse, to kind of underscore this point that we're going to make the world a better place through increased diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are there examples people would like to share or questions?
I would like to I am interested in what a person that has never been on a board has to do to become one.
Right.
In this non-profit work, right?
So we've trained and matched over 1,000 business people to serve on nonprofit boards, global, national, and regional. In many cases, a first-time board. Oh goodness. I'll check that comment afterwards, and I'll answer Anna for now. And so, first of all, there's a lot of mystery about nonprofit boards. So we try to dispel that and share an idea of what the role of a nonprofit board is. But that varies completely from one organization to another, depending on what they're trying to accomplish and what the revenue model is, because that drives a great deal. The funding can come from private philanthropy, from individuals, from government contracts, fees for services, foundations, and fees for services, not just government contracts. So there's a variety, and that will often drive thinking about who's on the board. The way we look at it is you've got the mission, your compelling value you bring to the world, and that's usually a fairly, that usually stands for a while, but sometimes it needs tweaking and updating. But the role of the board is to work with the CEO to envision the organization's greater potential in the next several years. So that can be expanding services along a continuum. It can be narrowing and focusing services. It can be a geographic ambition. It can be hub and spoke. I'm thinking about different organizations we've worked with. So where do you see yourselves in the next several years? And because of the pivots that nonprofits have had to make, technology is often an aspect of, and digital and remote communication is an aspect of what they're doing. So where does the organization see itself? What's the vision? Then what's the revenue model to achieve that? Because a vision's meaningless without looking, and usually the CEO and their team would have the expertise and with the board to figure out what's this patchwork quilt of revenues. And then based on that, what's this board's role in maximizing our strategic and financial potential, not the staff's role, but the board's role. So you can begin to be very clear. I just worked with a global organization where they finally came into $3 million of revenues that they had been waiting for. And the question then was not, how do we get money? It was, okay, now how do we focus our efforts for the greatest impact in achieving our mission? So it had nothing to do with fundraising or revenues. It was really about how are we going to really focus our work for greatest impact? So every board, it's a different issue that they're looking at. So you've got mission, vision, role of the board, expectations of board members, and that would involve attending meetings, maybe board meetings, maybe serving on a committee, a give-get, which is the combination of what you're supposed to give and contribute. I'm seeing some interesting patterns there that 10, 15, 20 years ago, boards were not too ambitious about what they asked. Then the numbers started going up. And now I'm happy to see that boards are starting to realize, wow, some people can actually give a lot, but others, we need them for other values they bring to the table. So everyone should give something, but having a set number minimum for everyone might work against your interests. And then that goes to board composition. So, I say to business people, if you're going to build a division or a small company, you don't say, let's find 10 people who like what we do. You say, okay, I need someone with this, with this, with this. What's the combination, the diversity of experience, expertise, relationships, networks, and diversity in every sense that you need for this board to maximize its effectiveness in achieving the organization's potential. So you've got composition, then you can think about, okay, how do we identify and recruit people? And then you can have that one-on-one conversation. This is why we're interested in you for the board. This is what we're hoping you'll contribute. And then that's a conversation. Christelle mentioned it, but I've heard many people of color say, I don't want to be brought on to be the DEI guy, so I've heard finance people say, I don't want to go on to be the treasurer. I want to do other things. So that's a conversation with anyone you're recruiting. So then composition committees should be aligned with the work of the board, and then agendas of board meetings. And it's really important that agendas of board meetings focus on the board's work, not the staff's work, and that there be an opportunity for really serious engagement and interaction on a strategic issue, not necessarily to make a decision, but for everyone to engage in a real meaty strategic issue. Otherwise, it just can read reports. Why am I coming to this? And that's where the richness of a diverse board really comes into play in that conversation. And it can be really enlightening for people to hear different perspectives. And people should leave feeling inspired, more deeply educated about the work of the organization and the challenges, but also having an idea of how they might be useful, which requires then a one-on-one follow-up call. But it's not just giving money. There are a lot of ways people can be useful. And so that's a value. So I will stop. This is my favorite subject, as you can tell. So, but I hope that, so helping dispel the mystery. And then in exploring boards, it's important to really understand what the organization is trying to achieve, what's their revenue model, who's on the board, what's missing and what you can bring to the table, and be very thoughtful about, is this the right board for me? And missions, everyone says you have to be passionate about the mission. Absolutely correct. But most people have many interests and can become passionate about a lot of different things. What most people want is to be able to add value, to be useful. So that conversation is really critical. I will stop, I promise.
I'll make a quick
Thank
point.
you.
So we're looking at part of our role on our committee, board development governance, is recruiting folks from the organization, and it's kind of a hard thing to do because you want to engage folks in the organization, but you often don't know what they have to offer or what they might be interested in, or if they're even interested in helping. So I think it's really I would advise, and my limited experience compared to Alice and Tracy, but to approach the executive director and leadership of the organization, like, hey, I'm interested in the board role, and I think I might be able to contribute to my background, because we are all stuck in a place where we can't really solicit everybody who is a member of our organization to see who's interested in board, because we don't want to turn people down. But at the same time, we also want people who are already engaged and trying to find that balance, and really not having, we don't collect the kind of data where we'd be able to have understanding of what their professional interests are or the value they might have, or even network to try to bring to solve some of the problems we have. So we're working right now on that. I think I'm actually asked Alice about this after the call, but the matrix, or like that intersection of like, what we need as a board and an organization, and then who we have available that we can like look out to and maybe tap to see if they're interested in. Part of like my initial step in that strategy is we do have an advisory council. So we're just an off ramp for people who were board members. And I want to make an on ramp people who are interested in becoming board members so that we can get them involved in committees, but necessarily the board, and see, how that plays out. But pipeline can be really difficult, I think, is
and
as
the
Tim
fact
mentioned earlier.
that you're being so strategic and purposeful also gives you the opportunity to say to someone who's interested, you're amazing. You would bring great value to many boards right now. This is where we're going, and these are the people we have. So the gaps we're most focused on right now are such and such, but maybe at a future time, so it's not a personal thing. I want to answer Mike's question to that point. It's a really important question. And that is about the fiduciary responsibilities of a nonprofit board. It is serious. And there are the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. So the duty of care is for for-profits and nonprofits, which means you have to go to meetings, you have to read the minutes, you have to know what's going on. And with that is the business judgment rule that says if a board makes a bad decision, the court's going to be okay with that as long as you can show that people attended the meeting, read their minutes, were on top of things. And then so that's duty of care. Duty of loyalty, which is both businesses and nonprofits, is loyalty to the organization. When you're in that boardroom, your hat is for the organization. It is not personal. It is not for your business. And if you have a conflict of interest, you've got to announce it. It needs to go in the minutes, and the board might excuse you for that discussion and decision, or permanently. It depends, often just for that discussion and decision. So that's duty. And now nonprofits have a third duty, which is just so beautiful to me, that for-profits do not have, and that's the duty of obedience to mission. So mission is everything. You are not for profits. You need revenues to do what you're doing, but your decisions should be guided by, will this help allow us to advance the mission? And if it's something we need to generate funds for, then let's figure out how to do that. And in terms of the fiduciary, to me, the coolest thing, why I'm so fascinated with boards, that is the board has the ultimate responsibility, ethics, accountability, crisis management, the ultimate responsibility for an organization's integrity and accomplishments, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit. And I highly recommend, I've been telling everyone, because I keep thinking about this movie called Downfall, just came out on Netflix just this year. Downfall, something about Boeing. It's the Boeing case study. It's a documentary. It is absolutely amazing, showing the company before it was acquired and after, and the difference in cultures that ultimately led to 2 planes and crashing and hundreds of people dying, how it led to that, an entire change in culture. So I would encourage you, because it has to do with every organization.
So part of Mike's question was also, or his point, and thank you for it, Mike, and we won't put you on the spot to speak. You mentioned already that your internet's in and out. But part of the point I saw in Mike's comment was that being on the board is not the only opportunity, right? So we've mentioned advisory boards. Alana mentioned in the chat that you can often, some boards will invite you to join a committee, which may be designed as an on-ramp for full board membership, or may just be they need more people on the development committee, they need additional people on a audit committee or whatever else it is. And I would add, as another way to contribute as professionals in across lots of sectors, is just to offer your services. So we benefit, and in Gender Health, we benefit from pro bono legal services, from pro bono executive coaching services. We've had some pro bono graphic design services. So if you're a management consultant or you're something else, that can be really helpful. My organization doesn't need people to come and make sandwiches for an event. That's not the kind of volunteering we need. Others do, but the kind of professional service exchange can be incredibly valuable. So that's another way to contribute to a nonprofit that appeals to you and is important to you. In addition to making a contribution. And I will also tell you that it means a lot to nonprofit organizations to have you elevate their content and their mission. So if there's an organization that you are really interested in and you want to support them, believe it or not, following them on all the social media accounts, amplifying their posts, introducing them to people, kind of showing up for people, especially in our so virtual world these days, is a way to make a contribution. It is a way to support an organization that is lower stakes than the fiduciary responsibility and everything else of being on a board, maybe less time commitment, but really does make a difference. I mean, the number of doors that Alice has opened for me and in Gender Health, for example, because of her interest in the work that we do and how we do it, is remarkable. And Alice is not on our board at this time, but I think that there are other ways to contribute, and you all have already identified some of those.
Yeah.
I want to see, Avinash made a comment. Oh, sorry, Caleb, did you want to jump in?
No, I was going to say.
Okay, Avinash, it looks like you can unmute. Do you want to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to add to what you just said, right? So our platform is a learning platform. And what we do is we have mentors and experts share their knowledge on the platform, either in one-on-one mentoring sessions or they can start their own groups. And one of the things that we did to connect for-profit mindset to nonprofit is to let these mentors, who are generally, thought leaders in their space, so not always they're going to charge, but if they charge, what they do is they can share their proceeds to any cause that they want to support. So we are connecting with a number of nonprofits on one side where they can choose and say, well, if I'm going to charge for my 50 people session over here, here's 20 to 25% that goes to this particular cause. So something very close to what you just mentioned.
It can really make a difference. I was talking to somebody who works for a United Nations charity, and they just completed a 5K run where they needed volunteers on the route. They needed people to contribute. They needed people to run and build teams and run. This is the United Nations. This is one of the many United Nations charities. They raised tens of thousands of dollars. I think he said $50,000 day of, plus all the sponsorship. This is like some real money being raised. And the number of people pitching in is really dramatic. So there's just lots of different ways to engage. I think your suggestion and Avinash in terms of mentors and experts and bringing those skills and offering that to nonprofits is also excellent. And I would encourage those of you who are in the for-profit sector to look to people in nonprofits for different perspectives also. If there's, this can be a mutual engagement and exchange. There's a lot of expertise, and I know I have a couple of board members myself who are academics and invite me to speak to their business school classes or public health school classes because I bring a different perspective than they have. And as a board member, they can share their view and their role. But as CEO of this organization and having spent the last 25 years doing similar work, I can also bring something back. So across sectors, I think just opening the doors and inviting each other in adds to the richness of what we all do.
I'm going to share a quick anecdote. So for the holidays, my company we usually give gifts to our partners. I think it's pretty common. And so what we decided this year was to give gifts to nonprofits on behalf of the partners. And so it's just something that we decided to do. So I was put in charge of finding which nonprofits we're going to donate to, and just trying to be strategic about that. And so, but it was a really cool opportunity to be able to support those organizations and engage with them, because I think that in the space that we're working in, which is blockchain, and looking at organizations that are really advancing education for diverse populations within blockchain, it was easy to kind of line that up as like, well, we can support you, it's going to help us, but it's also going to help support nonprofits. So it was just something I hadn't really encountered before, and how we can support nonprofits from different vectors, if you will.
Love that. So we were planning on wrapping up at about 10 of the hour, so just in the next few minutes. I don't think any of us have anywhere immediately to go, so we can stay a little longer, but I know it's been a long day or evening of sessions, depending on where you are. Are there any other questions or comments or reflections that people would like to make before we wrap? Alice or Caleb, any last thoughts?
I want to emphasize the importance of the equity and inclusion in terms of really recognizing and appreciating diverse perspectives, and also that some people are extroverts and they will jump in on a conversation. Others are more introverted, and it's really important to call on and engage. I've taught graduate business students with a lot of international students, and I learned from a mentor early on, students who don't speak up, call on them. And when I did it, what's amazing every time I've done it is that person has something really amazing to say. They've been sitting there thinking, but some people need to be invited to contribute. And it was just amazing to me. And it's really important in board meetings that everyone be included, everyone's comments be appreciated and respected. I think someone mentioned earlier, sort of unconscious things that we do. That's something we have to be very conscious and purposeful about.
Yes, I think this is a very good summary, and it's a great discussion. One thought that comes to my mind and is like, yeah, we have to change our mindset and really be serious about appreciating differences and feel included, because we are all diverse by thinking, right? We all bring something different. It's like somebody said that if you judge the fish by its ability to climb, it will always fail. And I think we all need to remember that each one of us brings something different to the table. And it's very, very important. And it can be the gift that is just actually needed.
Thanks for that, Anna. I think that, we need to celebrate what's different among us. And then I think as we do that, we can also find commonalities sort of across humanity, and that people who look very different, have very different backgrounds and experiences, will still find a lot in common if we can get people in the room together to find that out about each other. And that's one of the things that I think is so wonderful about working globally, about being part of the global LEAD community, the things that we also share. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. We will wrap up this session, and in 40 minutes, we'll start the last session for today. Very interesting about systemic thinking. I would like to encourage everyone to be there, because this can be something that will help us to deal with complexity and the interrelationship between the things. And complexity is usually something difficult.
Complexity is a good thing. Thank you so much, Anna, for facilitating us. Thanks, Jeff and Jorge, for your behind the scenes work. And thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon or evening. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Tracy, for pulling us together.
Yeah.